to see how much longer this is going to go. We are in our second week of talking about stewardship. That's one of those words that we use around the church that I think is rapidly becoming unknown in the rest of the world. And it's probably worthwhile to stop at the beginning and say, this is what stewardship is. The reason I know it's not used in the rest of the world is because when we have our middle school, our affirmation of baptism kids come, they come to us and we start talking about stewardship of creation. And we say, so do you talk about stewardship of creation in schools? And they say, and you get this deer in the headlight look, which either they do and they haven't been listening, or they simply don't. We say, okay, is there any curriculum anywhere that tells you that you should take care of the earth? Long silence. Well, we're supposed to recycle, they usually tell us. Okay. So we start from the beginning with them. Stewardship is the practice of being responsible for taking care of things, of gifts, of money, of land that in fact is not ours. It is given to us to take care of. It is a basic biblical concept that says all that is here in this world belongs to God. Everything. Everything you earn, everything you have, everything you own, everything that's out there is God's first. And then God gives it all to us and says, be good stewards of what I have given you. It's not just the tangible stuff like our baptismal fund, which runs, or the money in our pockets or not, or the food on our table. It's also the intangible stuff of being able to love somebody, of being able to forgive somebody, of being able to encourage somebody, of being able to teach somebody. Those also are gifts of God given that we are to be stewards of those kinds of gifts. The gift of being able to produce music. Last week we talked about the fact that stewards of God, the Church of God, is called to be stewards of the gift of healing. That we are called to bring life, not death, into this world, into our communities, into our lives. That we are to strive, even though we don't do this perfectly, we are to strive to make life-giving choices, healing choices. And that's part of what it means to be a stewardly people. Today we have a different story. I think it's ironic it's about a wedding. No, I'm not going to talk about the wedding. But it is about humility and hospitality. And those, again, are gifts that we're given to be stewards of, to use responsibly, not only for ourselves, but especially for others in this community, the church, but in this community, the world. And Jesus basically is making this statement about, if you were invited to a feast and you choose to sit down in the place of honor, that's probably not the smartest thing to do, because the host is likely to come along and say, hey, that seat belongs to somebody else. I want the bishop to sit there. Could you move? This concept of being invited to a banquet is repeated over and over and over again. And in fact, we could say that God invites us to a banquet. We could also say that God calls us to a banquet. Or we could say that God names us to be people at the banquet. It's the same word in Greek. In Greek, the word is kaleo, and it means call, invite, name. So, when I baptize in the name of, I call on behalf of God. I name and I invite in God's name. Being a steward of the gift of the sacrament of baptism. It's kind of an interesting question though, isn't it? Which one would you rather God did for you? I mean, if God's going to speak to you about the use of your gifts, and he says, hey, I want to have a conversation with you about these gifts. Would you like him to say, I invite you to show up? Or would you rather he said, I'm going to call you to show up? Or would you like him to name you so that you will show up? What do you think? We have different feelings about those words, don't we? I mean, for some of us, if I'm invited, it means, well, if it doesn't suit me, I don't have to respond. Correct? If I'm called, that's a little more difficult. It's so much harder to say no in person. It's really hard to say no to God when he calls you, I want you to tell you that. But if you're named, Bob, come up here. There's something about that. It's alarming. It makes your heart go pit-a-pat. It refocuses your attention almost immediately. Some of you are really hoping I don't give the second example. Here's the point, folks. I know this, see, back then, when people sat down at a feast together, there was this honor power system going on. So that where you sat, at what table, and where at that table demonstrated what kind of preferential treatment you would get. Okay? So, the head table last night all got champagne. The rest of us did not. Okay? 12 people, champagne. The rest of us, no. Okay, you're on your own. All right? That's what we call preferential treatment. They were also higher up. We had them up high so we could see them. All right? The rest of us were down on the floor. Preferential treatment. See? We still do it today. Not just at weddings, though. Okay, when I go to a dinner, funeral, potluck, whatever, we all sit at tables waiting to be called, do we not? Right? Happens at weddings, too. And we're all kind of hoping, especially if we don't get dismissed all at once, that we're at the table what? Thank you, that goes first. And there's that really sort of interesting time before they dismiss the first table when you're wondering which side of the room are they going to start on. Did I pick the correct spot? Because if they start over there, wow, have I got a long wait. Preferential treatment. Wanting to be first. Very human. Very humanly part of the community of people. It is hard for us to think in terms of being hospitable in how we eat together. Another example. Coffee hour. We tend to sit down with the people we know, correct? I mean, after all, we haven't seen them all week. It's a great chance to catch up. I'm not judging you. I want you to understand that. This is what we do as human beings. We sit down with the people we know. Now, we've been really good Christians. We've greeted all those visitors. And besides, half of our visitors run straight for the door. They don't run for the coffee hour. You have to sort of block the door and say, don't go. We have a great coffee hour. But then when it's time for them to be seated, our tables, folks, are full because we sit with each other. We sit with the people we know, who we're comfortable with, we want to see once in a while. Now here's the thing. I get this completely because I do it all the time. But Jesus, very, very inconveniently, says, when you have a banquet, let me rephrase that. When you have a potluck, when you have a coffee hour, invite the poor, the lame, the blind, because they can't repay you. In other words, okay, we don't have too many of those folks walking in our doors. Invite the people you don't know. Invite the visitor, the stranger, to sit with you. They will probably never repay you. They may never come back. But in this moment, at this one time, God is asking us to be hospitable by finding a place at the table for the stranger. That, folks, is being a steward of the gift of hospitality. It's about deciding that we have enough courage, that we have enough freedom from our fears about what would happen if, to be able to say to the stranger, or perhaps to somebody we know we don't like too well, why don't you come have coffee with us? Why don't you sit next to me? We have a chair here. Or two, or three. That is the practice of hospitality. It's not complicated, but it can be hard. It is what it means to be a steward of God's good gifts. There is a flip side to this, which is the attitude that we go at it with. God calls us to an attitude of humility. Now, some of us think humility means that we always go last at every function and we always sit in the back row. I won't name any names. That, folks, is not humility. That is personal preference. I had a professor who once said to me, if you were really being humble and if you were really being hospitable, you would sit in the front row so that all those visitors and latecomers don't have to walk all the way up to the front row. We were all seminarians and we thought, oh, I don't think so. We're not that humble or steward or hospitable. So, Buechner has a wonderful definition of being humble. Humility is often confused with saying you're not much. You're not much of a bridge player, for instance, when you know perfectly well that you're pretty good. Conscious or otherwise, this kind of humility is kind of gamemanship. If you really aren't much of a bridge player, you're apt to be rather proud of yourself for admitting it so humbly. This kind of humility is low counting. True humility doesn't consist of thinking ill of yourself. I want you to hear that. True humility does not consist of thinking ill of yourself, of putting yourself down. It consists of thinking of yourself pretty much as the way you think of everybody else. It is the capacity for being no more, but also no less pleased with you than you are with the people around you. That, folks, is humility. As stewards of God, as people of Jesus Christ, we are called to be hospitable all year round. And we're called to practice humility all year round. Amen. Will you please stand to sing?